Hey everyone, welcome to the Teach Middle East podcast. My name is Lisa Grace. Today I have Tom Sherrington as my guest on the podcast, and we're going to be talking about his career. We're going to be talking about his work, his books, his love for teaching and learning. And we're going to dive in somewhere around the end. We're going to be talking about feedback and walkthroughs and lesson observations, which is something I've read extensively on his blog. So I won't blab on. I just want to welcome Tom to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really delighted to be talking to you.
Thank you so much. Tom, where did it begin, this whole career in education that you have going?
Well, it's kind of the only career I've ever had because I started teaching when I was straight out of university in 1987. I got my first job. I didn't really know I'd spend the rest of my career teaching, but I enjoyed it. So I just thought I'd do it to start with, and that was a long time ago. A bit physics and maths teacher, and then in the 90s, I got interested in sort of school leadership. Working in a couple of comprehensive schools in London. I spent a stint in an international school in Jakarta in Indonesia in 2005 to 2008. And when I came back from that, I was a head teacher for about 11 years. But around about 10, 11 years ago, nearly 12 years ago, I started writing a blog about teaching, TeacherHead.com, just reporting on everyday stuff in school. And I found to my amazement, people read it. So I started sort of finding, well, there's an audience for people talking and exploring what happens in schools and in lessons. So yeah, I sort of developed a kind of an audience for writing, and then since then I've written various books. And the last 7 years I've been training teachers. Mainly, I think of myself as a teacher trainer. I visit a lot of schools. I watch a lot of teachers teach and do training. So that's my main career now. But that's going 30, 35 years or so.
I'm a reader of your blog, so I've read TeacherHead for several years. What would you say is one of the biggest things you've gained from having started that blog?
I think the main thing, I mean, a lot of bloggers would say this, is it helps you clarify your own thoughts. So when I have the blog to write and a kind of audience for it, I it makes me think hard about things, because I can think in my own head, like everybody does, but I think I know that this is a common issue. So I feel like I've learned that whatever I think about teaching, lots of other people also have the same challenge because they're quite common. So I feel like I think hard about how do I communicate that, and how do I express that challenge so that it kind of relates to other people, and then what do I think the answers are. So because I know the blog is there and people will read it, I kind of channel that. That's the main thing I've learned, that we have a lot in common, and I've gained a lot just by having that kind of audience of people engaging with it. So I've met lots of people through it, and so on, other fellow writers, bloggers, teachers. But that's the main thing. You're sort of thinking, like when I'm in a lesson, I'm thinking, oh, this is an interesting challenge this teacher's having. I bet loads of other people have this challenge. And a couple of weeks later, sure enough, that appears in a blog post, because I think, well, if it was tough for them, it would be tough for lots of people, and that often resonates.
And then you have the audience that you've already sort of curated and built up. But what about people who are just starting out in this whole blogging and maybe even video? How would you encourage them to get on that road if they're like a little bit hesitant?
I get asked that a lot. I feel like sometimes people will ask me because they think I've got a reasonable number of followers and so on. So, but I actually think that's kind of a bit overwhelming. When I first started, there are people I used to look up to and think, wow, how do you ever get to be that sort of well known? And I was thinking, well, you don't really, you just start by doing it. So you have to be sort of very kind of unassuming about it to begin with, just doing it. So you have to just think, well, the blog is mine. I'm going to write it for me. I'm going to curate my stuff. So you feel like the sense of pride in it, and think it's mainly yours. And then promote it to others because you think you're pleased with it. And I do think this is something that sometimes people are weirdly kind of half-hearted about. Because they're so sort of anxious about coming across as over-promoting. Now, rightly or wrongly, I've never had a problem with that. So I feel like, this is my honest view, I feel like if you've written something about school, it's inherently interesting to other teachers and people will want to know what you thought. And you should feel confident that it's worth sharing your perspective, as long as you couch it in that terms of, this is just what I think. I'm not telling you to believe me. I'm not selling this to you. I'm just saying this is what I think. And people will find that interesting. But you do have to keep telling people it's there. This is the thing I find sometimes people are weird. You have to let people know. Like, so I adopted this attitude right from the beginning, that when I'm tweeting links to my blog, I'm not saying, hey guys, come and look at me, aren't I great? I'm saying, I've got this thing, here it is, have a look. Because if I don't do that, you're not going to know it's there. So how else would anyone know it's there unless you tell them? So you have to sort of, it's like a sort of information service. And I find other people who tweet links to their blogs. So I think, thank God, thank you. Because if I hadn't seen that tweet with that link, I'd never know you'd written that. So how else could I have? You've helped me come across your work. Thank you. And I really see it in that way. I'm quite sincere about that. Like I feel like I'm sharing access to something. But yeah, I think you have to get over that bit. I know people find it painful, but you just have to kind of say, well, I think it's okay to read it. Have a see what you think, and keep going. And then the last thing to say, keep doing it. I feel like if people sort of blog and then 3 months later they do another one, and then it's a bit hard to get a rhythm. So all the bloggers I know that I know off the top of my head are people who write something, every month at least. And when you look on their blog, there's a kind of catalogue of things that they've produced over time, and you can say, oh wow, look at all this stuff that they've done. There's a frequency to it. So I'd say keep it up. Be very honest, keep down to earth, and keep writing bits, and people will find it interesting.
Yeah. I'm going to stay on that topic for a little bit. How do they decide what to write about? Because that's another question that get asked a lot.
I think that's so interesting, and I think it's quite useful to have a thing that you're known for a bit if you want to build an audience. So over the years, I've written about curriculum, about assessment, about teaching stuff, various things. And I think there are people I know of who are the writers about reading, the people who I know who really get into some cognitive science stuff. I know people who are history bloggers, people who write about school leadership. So I feel like you need to find a kind of groove that you think you've got quite a lot to say, and then keep it quite tight to something. So you don't have to sort of write a great state of the nation address every time you write a blog. You just go, well, here's a little thing I've observed, and then what I do is I make a list of ideas. Every couple of months, I sort of think, well, I've got some ideas brewing. These are the things I might write about. I make a list, and then I think, yeah, I'll do that one. And then when I write a specific blog, I always think, well, what are the main things here? And I make a list within that of the things to say, and then I start writing it. So I always sort of plan what I want to say, and I feel like that's always worked for me. But it I think it's something you have to feel like it's something that's a challenge that then needs a solution. That's one type of blog. So here's the thing I found difficult. Here's what I tried. Other blogs I love are ones about a lesson. So here's a lesson I taught. Here's the resources I used. Here's some outcomes I had. I'm not sure if this worked, but I tried this. Or it could be a kind of honesty thing. Like some people saying, this is how it feels to me at the moment in my career with my leadership role, or wanting to be a middle leader, or if you are a senior leader, thinking these are some of the problems we're experiencing in our school at the moment, and this is some of the things we're trying. So you're sort of reporting to the world what's going on, and trying to make it as useful as possible. So those are my. I've got some suggestions. So been asked this a few times. One of the things I find I often say is try to make it useful and interesting. So useful means it's got practical suggestions for things to do. At least in some of your posts. Interesting is when there's a bit of personality in there, and find a voice where you sort of, say what you think, and just be kind of opinionated. I think it's okay to say, I really hate that, or I really love this. As long as people know you're expressing an opinion and not sort of telling them how to think, I think people will find that interesting. You don't have to be sort of super balanced the whole time.
Yeah. Here's the other thing though. When people are opinionated, say what they think, they might get some hate. How do you deal with hate, especially on Twitter? And I follow you, so I know what's up. How do you handle it?
I feel like there's kind of people who critique what you say and don't agree with you, and I'm just mentally scanning through some of the people who I think, yeah, I know that person doesn't agree with me, but we get on fine, because they just say, yeah, Tom, no, I'm not sure about that. I think you're too this or you're too that or whatever, and they just tell you, and that's fine. And then there are other people I think are just rude, like they just, and sometimes it's the way they do it, like, and I feel like sometimes they sort of quote tweet you and say, "This is the most ridiculous advice you'll ever hear," or something. You're thinking, "Whoa!" You think now, as soon as someone does that to me, I just mute them completely. I just never hear from them ever again because I just think I'm not interested. I'm not interested in sort of people who are going to be rude. So I just block them out. So I kind of delete them from the Twitter world. So their lives carry on, and I never hear from them. I'm happy about that. So that's my perspective on it. I just think if you want to disagree with me, just reply to me and say, "Oh, Tom, I'm not sure what you're saying here. I've never found that to be true," or "You've oversimplified this," or "Yeah, interesting you say that. In my experience, it's not that. It's like this." And there's a kind of adult way of disagreeing with people without it being, yeah, look at this, isn't this rubbish? Or people saying things like, "I'm so disappointed in you, Tom. How dare you agree with, Tom Bennett about behavior," or something. You think, oh my gosh, I have no time for that either. So I've learned to be a bit sort of selective about. So I follow thousands of people. I have lots of interactions all the time. So I feel like I get enough discussion in my world without needing these sort of people. But if you're listening to this and you're thinking you'd like to write something and that puts you off, I'd say no, honestly, don't. Most of the time, like 95% of the time, people are just really kind. People are so supportive and kind and egg each other on and reshare your stuff and welcome people into the world of sharing blogs and stuff. So I really, the kind of negativity it is on the edge, but definitely.
What do you think of like the teacher influencers who are all about just the content and just trying to get popular without any depth or any real experience, like they go from PGCE to ECT to influencer all in 5 seconds. Like, how do you rationalize that? Because I see that a lot.
Oh, I don't know. I don't believe these people exist. I think, to be honest with you, I mean, I feel like a bit of an old man saying this, but I think sometimes you have to sort of think, well, why does it bother me? And I do sometimes have a word for myself because my gut feeling sometimes is, oh, come on, um, do some time, like earn your spurs a little bit, respect your elders. But then as soon as you're saying that, you're sort of thinking, listen to how old I sound, it, and I think I do have to filter out that sometimes and think it takes some courage to be so strong in your opinion so soon. But I don't know. I'm sort of glad I didn't have Twitter when I was 30. I think I'd have been an absolute nightmare. And actually, in my career, I did take time. So, I became a deputy head only of a small school. It was only had year 7. So I had a 1 form entry. So it's like a sort of learning job. And there's only 10, 11 teachers. So I was deputy head of a tiny school, and it grew each year. It's so that was a really great learning curve for me. But I always, I didn't become a head teacher till I was 40 or something. So that seems to be like a reasonably sort of steady time scale. And I certainly was just a mainstay. I taught full classes, full timetable for a long time before um, I would have felt I had anything to say to other people. So I do think there is a kind of thing of like cutting your teeth, teaching a few exam classes, um, learning the trade, committing to it, and I feel like I did that, and it does. I do know what you mean. And the thing about influencers, though, I feel like there's a double-edged thing, because I also think it's important to amplify people's voices. So I always feel like when someone is amplifying their voice, they've done a talk at TeacherHead, or they've written a book, teacher books, go for it. Why shouldn't you? You should feel like, I've got something to say, and as a teacher, I want to share that with the world. But I guess you have to just be prepared for other people to say, there is a bit more to it to this, and so on. So some of the books I see and so on, I feel like they sound like someone who's only been teaching for 5 years, but fair enough. I mean, they want to put their voice out there. Yeah, so I feel like you need to be a little bit sort of sympathetic. It would be much worse, for example, if you felt like you had to wait 10 years before you were allowed to say anything. That would be terrible.
It's not that, you know what? Because I see it and I'm like, are you serious? Like, if I dropped you in my school in Haringey, you wouldn't even last a minute. But, but it's not that they're young and they're trying to become teacher influencers that bothers me. It's when they come at it not from a I'm learning standpoint and this is what I'm learning, to the
Mm.
I'm the expert. And I'm like, really? In 5 minutes, you're the expert? Um, that's the part that gets me. But anyway,
Yeah.
everyone has
No,
a
I do think
space.
I think that's true, and I feel like I probably fall into that trap from time to time of being sort of communicating sort of false certainty. I'm sure I do, and there are things where I feel quite strongly about them, definitely. Like, and I sort of feel like uh, sometimes in teaching we get a bit too woolly. We can sort of be saying, oh well, this works here and that works for me, and I'm someone who, you hear this phrase sometimes, something works, anything works somewhere. And I just think that's it, though. I feel like, I think there are some things which are just really not good ideas. And if you do them and you think it works, they probably don't work. It's just that you get away with it. You don't notice the damage it's doing, because your children probably don't need it. There are some situations where you teach where it doesn't really matter what you do too much, because the children will kind of be all right because they're supported by the world they're in. And you might think that activity is working, but it probably isn't really. It's just not harming. So it's sort of,
Not
and you
visibly
mislead.
harming.
And I've done that myself. I've done some sort of ridiculous sort of experiments, if you like, which I feel like I enjoyed them, but I wouldn't claim they worked as a sort of general thing to advocate to other people with more difficult situations to work in. So I feel like you have to be careful about saying, um, I remember in this, I used to teach in a selective school, which has had some very high achieving students. And I did some really interesting things with them. They used to teach a lot of the lessons with me and so on. And they got amazing results. In our GCSE, we got something like, they all got, is that when we had A stars, they all got A stars except one or something. It was crazy. I mean, and I blogged about it saying like, we did these amazing lessons and they did really well. But somebody, I think it was Greg Ashman, who someone will know, he replied to me saying, that's like wearing lucky socks on exam day. Just because you wore your lucky socks on the exam and you did well doesn't mean that you did well because you were wearing the lucky socks. And I was thinking, and I've always remembered that there's a bit of a kind of burst my bubble a bit, thinking, no, he's right. Um, the cause and effect is hard to prove, and just because I did those things doesn't mean those are the reason why I got good outcomes necessarily. I'm sort of hoping that's true, but I might not know that. Yeah, so I think everyone definitely needs to be cautious about over asserting cause and effect in what they're doing, especially if you're suggesting other people do it, which is obviously a different thing altogether.
No, you're so right. Especially if you're prescribing it and going, this is advice for this set of
Yeah,
people, and you're going, context,
especially if you're
everyone,
saying
context.
especially if you're saying everybody now has to do it. That's even worse. And you do come across that, don't you? You sort of start saying, I've had this, I think this is a good idea. Now, everybody in the school, you all have to do X. You think, oh gosh, you've got to be so careful about anything where you make people do the same thing, because that you've got to be very confident that's a really good idea.
Yeah, for sure. How did you make the transition into writing books?
Well, when I left teaching, being a head teacher for a whole host of reasons, I had some time to start with. So I wanted to build up being a consultant and start working in schools. And I thought, well, suddenly, like freed from the day to day, every day in school, high pressure, I just thought, I'll write a book now because. But I thought I had all this blog. I had 5 years of blogging behind me by that point. So it was almost like the book of the blogs. That's how I saw it. It's like, and I had this idea of the learning rainforest, and I pitched it. I had this quite beautiful exchange with the publisher John Catt, who the publisher. This is an amazing phenomenon, which is I emailed them one day in February 2017 saying, I've got this idea for a book based on my blog. It's called Learning Rainforest. And then I sent the email, and then I looked at my emails, and there was this email from John Catt saying, "Hey Tom, we really like your blog. We think it would be great if you wrote a book." And I was going, "But I just emailed you," and they just emailed me. And they literally, in like a Tuesday morning, totally randomly, on exactly the same moment, they emailed me and I emailed them. It's like amazing. So I was just saying, I had to double check and going, this is so bizarre. Like I've literally just asked you, and you've literally just asked me, and then we exchanged. And I'm like, yeah, so that was a great thing. But that happened because I had already written quite a lot, and that's the thing. The blogging was my kind of practice bed, sort of what works, what's interesting, finding a way of doing it. And then the Learning Rainforest, yeah, I wrote that, and that's now 7 years ago. The next one that did quite well was the Rosenshine Principles in Action, and that was a fluky thing as well. So I've got it in front of me here. I was doing a talk at a research event. So I was really interested in Rosenshine's principles, and I did a talk. I said that here's a really amazing document. It's such a simple summary of lots of great ideas. And it was like a half-hour talk. And at the end of it, this publisher came up to me and said, that would be really useful to summarize what you just said in a sort of little pamphlet, like a short booklet. How do you fancy writing a short booklet, a pamphlet almost, about the principles to go to that people could access with them? And I said, okay, so I tried it. And then they decided to publish it, and that's where this book, Rosenshine's Principles of Action, came from.
Oh.
They literally asked me to make it as short as possible. So I wrote the sort of shortest book ever written about teaching. We had to stick the Rosenshine principles in it to beef it up so it was thick enough to sort of stand up. So that was really amazing. And I think because there was a kind of time 5 years ago where a lot of schools were finding this set of ideas is so helpful, it kind of took off. Yeah. So those, and then the walkthroughs was Oliver Carigioli approached me. He said, this was a brilliant insight. He just said, isn't it amazing just how many brilliant ideas there are out there in education? There's so many, aren't there? But the problem is that we'll lose them. We have to hold on to them. So why don't we curate like the ideas that we know people are talking about, and then make it a visual guide, because that's obviously his thing, making things visual. So we agreed to sort of try it, and the walkthroughs took shape from there, the sort of step-by-step guides. But that was again him suggesting to me that to collaborate. So yeah, it's always, each of the books I've written has had this sort of fluky sort of start point, but it's just how life goes sometimes.
And what's your writing process like? Like when you sit to I know the blogs help because you said you had that backlog of work, but something like Walkthroughs, which was done in collaboration with somebody else, what's your process like?
Yeah, well, it's the walkthrough is a particular style of writing which I think is which suits me well because it's short chunks. So what we do is then we sort of scope out the whole book first, and we just say, okay, so we you sort of talk a little about what's the whole theme and who is it for and who's going to read it, and then you think, okay, so what are the main areas that we want to cover, and we came up with 6 areas: curriculum, explaining, questioning, how do we learn, a kind of why section, and so on. So we came up with these some broad ideas. And then we just made a list. Okay, so let's go to the next level. What would we have in each of those sections? And you just break it down, boom, boom, boom. So you end up with this sort of skeleton of almost like the contents page of your book. And I always find that's really helpful because then you can sort of sequence the order and say, we'll start here, then we'll go there. And when you're writing one bit, you don't have to stray because the next bit will be done. So you can always see what's coming. And then when I'm in one of the walkthroughs, it's just because it's kind of mechanical, there's 5 steps. So I always think, okay, so I'm going to think, I focus totally on that idea. And I just think, how would that work then? What do you need to think about? And I've got to come up with 5 things. So I write down, you do that, and that, then that, then that, and that, 5 things. And then when I'm happy with the 5, I go, okay, so let me describe each step. And it's very broken down like that. And it's quite quick in a way because but then when you write something a bit longer, a bit more prose-like, um, I feel there's a slightly different style, which is to be a bit more opinionated, a bit more sort of write a little bit how you talk and have examples. Sometimes everyone has a different style. I know some other bloggers, for example, who their blogs are sort of like semi-academic papers. They sound like they could be in a journal. I could never write that way. I'm far too casual and colloquial, and I'd like to sort of not, I don't know, avoid sounding too sort of academic. But so you have to find your style, a sort of way of writing that you feel is yours. But yeah, that's what I'm doing. The recent blog, for example, I wrote my most recent one is about leaders that I've encountered and what I think their characteristics are. So I was thinking, I meet all these amazing people. They're so buzzy and they always have this energy, but they really know their stuff. And I was thinking, so let me write this down. I just thought, what are the 3 features of them? And I wrote them down: headings, and describe the headings, and then it kind of writes itself in that way. You have to be clear what it is you want to say in advance and then deliver the writing afterwards. Other people I've met say they just sort of feel their way through the whole piece, and I've never done that. I've never felt that worked for me. You end up writing way too much waffle, and then editing it. I'm terrible at editing. So yeah, people who, if you talk to someone like Peps McRae, he's like he writes like 200,000 words and then pares it down and pares it down and pares it down until it's just exactly the words he needs. So he starts huge and then shrinks it down to the bare minimum. And that's an amazing process, but it's totally opposite to me. Mine is start with the skeleton and fit it out, and then that's it. So it's very lean right from the beginning.
Yeah, I'm like a bit of both, but I think I really I enjoy the editing process. So I do write and write and write, and then I
Yeah,
go back and I challenge myself. How much can I get rid of? And I just try to chop and I chop and chop and chop until I get right to the
yeah.
heart of what I want to say. But if you know the issue is that a lot of the writing that's going on now in education seems to be pitched at more the classroom level, and very few are being written, in my estimation, at school leaders. um who are you reading now that you think would be interesting for people who are maybe aspiring for school leadership or are currently in school leadership? Who do you find interesting now?
Oh wow. Well, it depends. I think it depends slightly what aspect of school leadership that you're interested in. Um, and I could turn around to my shelf here and see books. So there's things to do with, say, um, there's a great head teacher called Matthew Evans, for example. Matthew Evans, who's writes brilliantly about the whole big challenge of running a school and the complexity of some of the challenges. His blogs about leadership, I think, are excellent. more broadly, sort of think pieces. Someone like Ben Newmark, similarly, great sort of challenging think pieces about how do we frame the big challenges in education about special needs or teacher recruitment. So that people like that, I think, are very good at giving a broad view of leadership.
That was a very selfish question, my listeners. I do that because I want to know who to read next and what to check out. And
But
I just,
there's also a culture. So Lekha Sharma has written a fantastic recent book about school culture. It's brilliant. It's a really clever sort of dive into what culture means and different strands. So I mean, Lekha Sharma's book on school culture is just is really good. And so there are various people like that I would say I recommend to read. And there's a really good, I mean, some slightly more focused books like Leverage Leadership, for example, Paul Bambrick Santoyo, because in there you've got all the stuff about coaching, which is feedback to teachers, which is not is about the classroom, but it's all about how you create a culture where teachers are receptive to feedback and so on. So he's also excellent. And I'll
brilliant
tell you what,
segue. Go
a book
ahead.
that hasn't come out yet, well, it has come out, but I haven't received my copy yet, so I'm sort of waiting for it to come in, is a book called Responsive Coaching by Josh Goodridge. And he's been working on coaching in schools for 10 years. He's one of the most intelligent, thoughtful people I've met in education. And he runs Step Lab, which some of you would have heard of. But his book, Responsive Coaching, is probably a lot people who've seen it already are really raving about it. So if you want to, I would really recommend getting that.
I'll see if I can find links to these that Tom's mentioning and also Tom's book to put in the notes. Tom, you wrote recently about feedback on your blog. So I really want to dive into that because it's such a hot topic here on the international scene. And in your article, you made this really strong case about co-constructing feedback rather than delivering it top down, right? But
Yeah.
tell me, from your experience, right, what was that turning point for you? When did you begin to kind of really hone in on advocating this approach?
Um, well, it's sort of been a journey. I mean, I used to do the whole observation, feedback, and judge lessons when I was a head years ago. And even then, I used to feel like, why do we do this? What's it? It's so weird. And I've been in sort of meetings with people going, let's triangulate our judgments. And we'd be saying, I thought it was good, but it was this. And it feels so, I felt like we were making it up. Like, this feels like we're making this up. And you'd hear all these you'd meet head teachers say, oh, you just know a good lesson when it's good. And you have this sort of badge of honor that I know, and I just think, but I feel like I'm guessing. So does everyone else really know? Because it felt like it was so subjective. So I always had my doubts about it. And then I feel like getting rid of graded judgments was the first thing. Now it's just about judgments. But even then, I used to find that I would have this workload thing of watching a lesson and then feeling I had to write it up because that was what you're supposed to do. And then I'd be typing into the night thinking, what was that lesson and what do I say? And then fit in this beautiful pro forma. And then I'd look at it and I remember being in my office as a head and looking in this filing cabinet thinking, what is this for? Like, I wrote this, here it is in this filing cabinet. That teacher is still doing half of the things that I thought they needed to change. And it's hard to get them to change all of that because they've got habits. And I just thought it was started to think this just doesn't work. It's sort of, who's it for? Who's benefiting? More recently, I just work with schools all the time, really forensically. I sit at the back of a lot of lessons, hundreds and hundreds of lessons. And more I just see how complex it is. I just think this isn't easy. And I've worked with lots of schools now on helping them move teaching forward. And I've come to the conclusion from my own practice, as well as reading other things, that the thing which really does work is when the teacher is driving it, when they themselves are saying, yeah, I need to do this. This is what I'm going to do. I need to, instead of doing that, I'm going to do that. I'm going to drop that stupid thing and do this much better thing. And they're really the energy in their own improvement. So how do I get that teacher to feel that? I have to involve them. I have to ask them. I have to I can suggest things, but they have to own it. And if they don't own it, this is what I've learned, they don't change. They just don't. It's like a brick wall, an intelligent brick wall, because an intelligent teacher is saying, look, mate, don't come at me with your intelligent suggestions. I'm fine. I've got my agenda. I know what I'm doing, and I don't need you to tell me stuff. And I've come across that resistance so often. So what I found is just to sort of say, I've had a look at what's happening in your lesson. Boy, you're working hard. Isn't it challenging? Here's some things that I was thinking about. What do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And how do you see it? And they're telling me their challenge. And then we agree and we solve problem solve and say, yeah, so that's interesting. So what might work there then? And we have a reference point of common ideas, but always leave with them saying, so my parting thing is always, so what are you going to do? What are you going to commit to then of all of those things? And they say this, okay. So that's great. So focus on that, and that's what you're going to do. Great. But they're kind of nearly always the driver of that. and then you find that they're working on it because they feel like it's their agenda. Now, if I wrote all that down and emailed them it wouldn't get anywhere close to that, nowhere near. So it would be a waste of my time, as well as annoying to them. So why would I do it? I mean, have you ever had feedback from someone who just emailed you or sent you a form and you just went, don't come to me with that. So, you know.
Sometimes I don't even read the thing, if I'm honest. If I look back at my career,
Yeah.
and I'm thinking, sometimes I got the feedback, I scanned it, and I didn't really read it properly. But it takes a certain kind of leader, though, Tom, because
Yeah.
if you're coming in from a point of, I know ye all things, what what is the importance then of being humble, watching out for your own biases as a leader going in to make those observations?
Well, I always think that's a really good question. I think you have to be very aware of your biases. And so what you do is you sort of hypothesize. You don't judge or make absolute assessments. You ask questions. So, and for example, you can coach someone or observe someone when they're teaching something you have no idea. So recently I was watching, say, a hockey lesson, which I thought was great. I thought it looked good to me because there were some features of it I thought I could look for. I don't really know if it was good. So I was with the head of PE who was watching it with me, and I said to him, "So I mean, I've got some views, but what was your sense? Was that strong practice? Were you seeing were you thinking that's excellent, or were you thinking, oh, there's some things there which that teacher could have been doing?" And I listened to what they had to say, and we kind of agreed with most of it because it was actually pretty strong. And so it was like questions. I had some questions similar, and that could be about other lessons. So recently I was in a school where I was watching some teaching and I was thinking, I had some doubts about it. I was thinking, this teacher's sort of, I'm not sure. I won't say too much about it, but I said, so what are the outcomes like in this department? Because does that teaching lead to strong outcomes? Because I'd be really interested to know, because they said, no, it doesn't. So I just thought, okay, so that's interesting, because I'm sort of triangulating, because I'm thinking the outcomes aren't strong, and that's what I'm seeing. So that means that my hunch that there's some issues there is perhaps worth exploring. And this is what I had to say. But I was asking, I wasn't assuming, because if they'd said to me, well, no, to be honest, they get great results, and I'd be thinking, okay, so what does that mean then? And it would make me think slightly differently about it. So anyway, I feel like you have to be humble. So you focus on what you can observe. And what I observe is things like really functional things, like when you said to the class, turn to your partner and talk about why the character did this thing, or why the water freezes in this scenario, whatever they've been asked, or why the answer is 6.2. You listen to the children in front of you and hear what they have to say, and you just listen in, and it's like your reality check. You can then feed that back to the teacher later and say, what do you know what the children said when you asked them that? This is what they said. And sometimes it's hilarious. Sometimes it's like nothing to do with what you asked. Sometimes it's mind blown. They're going, wow, the insight of those children is amazing. Like you asked them that question, and the discussion they had was amazing. But often it isn't amazing. Often it's really bad. It's like they're just sort of talking. They think you think they're having a discussion. They really aren't. One of them is talking, saying nonsense. The other one's going, yeah, 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 and then it's over. And you're thinking, hey guys, great, we had a good discussion, but it wasn't great. There, it was quite poor. So you're not critiquing the teacher or anything. You're saying, God, it's blooming hard, isn't it? You're setting something up which has a potential to be great, but for those kids it wasn't. So, and I noticed that. So we talk about that, and it's a reality. It's a thing I've observed. It's not a judgment. It's a thing I've observed, and I think that's more and more how I focus it. But of course, the teacher might be well aware of it, and I think it's so important to say. And I'm not saying I'd have sorted that out if I'd been teaching the lesson. Like you were doing all the work. It's so easy to observe a lesson. You just walk in, you sit it down, it's kind of cushy, you just watch. The teacher's having to think about everything. So you have to be so aware that just because I could notice something doesn't mean I would have done if I was teaching at the same time. So we have to sort of couch it as, so that's an interesting challenge, isn't it? The challenge that we've identified in your lessons is that some of the children don't quite have the knowledge that you might hope to run a conversation of that's that sophisticated without some support. So what sorts of supports might be useful then? Do you have them? What else could you have done? And we approach it with a sort of problem solving um, sort of mindset. I find that teachers really respond to that
Yeah.
because they don't feel told off. It's kind of annoying, isn't it, to have someone walk into your lesson and kind of like say what you could have done differently when the lesson's already happened. It's like, yeah, but I didn't do that, did I? Like, I can't go back in time and do the thing you said. I did the thing I did, and all I can do is think about what I want to do next. And so help me plan that. And so you have to have ideas for different things. So all of these things lead me to feel like co-constructing feedback is it's essential. It's essential. It's how schools should be.
Yeah. Yeah. You are so right. And I was, you know what I was thinking about as you were talking is how do we rationalize the gap between the lesson that is being observed because someone's there and the lesson that takes place normally when no one's there? How do we rationalize that gap? Because what you're seeing is probably not even what takes place on a normal basis. And so you going in with a judgment, you're not really learning anything, nor is the teacher learning anything because you're talking to them about what you've observed and kind of bringing in your judgments, your opinion, and they're just there with a defensive wall, normally invisible maybe to you or visible depending on how forthright that teacher is, and then they're just wishing that you would disappear, and then there's no help there. So I wanted to, before we kind of wrap up the podcast, I need to help some leaders move forward in that journey of just going in and handing judgment. How would we co-construct? I know you gave some clues, but just walk me through a scenario. How can a leader go in and co-construct that feedback with a teacher post observation? What does that sound like? Simulate one for me.
Okay, well, the way I would frame it, there's a couple of things to say to start with. So the first thing is I would set up a system before if I'm going to do this with a teacher, and I'd say that leaders should do this, is we have a process we know is going to run for months. So when I'm talking to a teacher or observing them, it's one of many of such interactions. It's hard to achieve this with just a one-off thing. So that's the first thing. And what we talk about is timescales of the order of say 3 or 4 weeks maximum, like 2 weeks even sometimes, but just say that sort of scale. So when let's say I was sort of coaching you, and I was saying I'd observe you first, and I'd say here's some general things, and I'd ask you the sorts of challenges you felt were useful. I'd ask you, what are you working on in your department? What's the thing your agenda's around? So I would focus my input around the thing you feel is a challenge you have, and I'd check that against my observation. Usually I would say, yeah, that's a good idea, because I think that's definitely something to look at. If I thought you were picking something to focus on, which I thought, having observed you, was like not really even the main thing, I might suggest something else. I'd say that's interesting that you think that. My perspective was that maybe there's quite a lot of mileage to work on this, and we discussed the goal setting in the first place. But then the first meeting would just be, okay, so let's have a think about this. Try this thing, then let's see how we go. And I would then come in to the lesson about 3 weeks later and say, let's see how that's going. Then are you doing the things you say you're going to do? And that's a really important kind of lens. Is the teacher effortfully trying to use those questioning techniques that they said they were going to try? And even if you see a teacher making an effort, you're making a start. Now, the way I would do it, I mean, I would use my Walkthroughs materials, which have got steps, but I'll make this answer more generic. I'd say that's what they said they were going to do. Are they doing it? And then I have this frame, which I've borrowed from the Paul Bambrick Sensoyo work, which is you use precise praise, probe, and then the problem and the action step. So precise praise, I'm looking for specific things the teacher's doing that are good. It could be a change they've made since the last time I observed them. It could be an example, an interaction with a couple of students I thought was really interesting. So you're trying to do that modeling. And I was with a student, the way you modeled it, they followed it perfectly. And they did that example exactly right, just like you showed. It was fantastic. So you explained it really clearly. They got it exactly straight away. You nailed it. And like, I've got an example of a specific instance where the thing they were working on works, or at least partially worked. So precise praise. Then I'd say, okay, so let's probe now. Let's talk about the challenges, because there's always challenges. So I don't give negative feedback. I just say, so there's good stuff happening. What are the challenges? And I might say to them, what sorts of things you were finding hard there, or was there any part of that lesson where you thought, oh no, it didn't go as well as I would have liked? And I asked the teacher to tell me what they thought. And I'm doing that for two reasons. One of them is because it is their lesson, as they own it, but also I'm hearing the way they express the problem. And if they say the same things I would have said, it tells me, hey, this teacher's got great self-awareness and self-judgment, and I can really work with that. If they don't see it, it tells me something else. If a teacher says, well, I thought it was great, no, I didn't see any problems, or I thought it was just fine, and I'm thinking, oh no, well, and then I start throwing in my reality check, and I start saying, okay, it's interesting, because what I noticed was a couple of things. And do you mind if I share that? What actually I observed was this happening. So, that's an interesting challenge, isn't it? That from your perspective, it was all fine, which is fine, which is, no problem with that. But what actually happened over here was something else. So it's just really important to be aware of it. So let's talk about that. So we throw in the challenge. I'm quite honest about those things. But I'm using information that I have had. So I'm not using a judgmental language. It was good, bad. That seemed to be effective for these reasons, and here's some challenges I observed. And then we then turn around and say, so what might you do next time then, or work on over the next 3 weeks to really work on that? And again, I'll invite the teacher to share that with me. And I say, okay, that's interesting. And we rehearse it a bit. So that would mean instead of doing this, you'll do that. So when you do the think, pair, share, you're going to get everyone to think for themselves. And then literally half the class shares their thoughts with their neighbor, and then they take turns and the other half shares that. So it's like really quite deliberate. Is that what you mean? Yeah, okay. So let's just run it through for me. What are you going to do? I hear the teacher then tell me. I say, okay, have a go at that a few times, and then I'll plan when I'm coming to see them next, and I tell them. So they know they're working on that for the next couple of weeks, and so by the time I come back in next, they'll have practiced, because they don't want to just suddenly me turn up and not do it. So it's a planned process. It's very explicit. None of that is like, I thought you were good or bad or anything. This is what I thought was. These are some instances which are working. Here's some challenges. What's the solution, and when are you going to act it? Without this being a super long answer, if when I return, say the second or third time, and the teacher's still doing all the things we talked about right at the start, I'll start having a different conversation and say, yeah, I still notice that's still happening though, isn't it? So why do you think that is? Is it hard? Are you finding it hard to do this, or is it something blocking? What's happening, and how do you feel about it? And sometimes they'll just say, well, I just didn't get around to it. And we just say, okay, well, let's talk about that. Is it something you really think you should do, or are you resisting it? And we have conversations like that. Is there something else you'd rather be working on? And you kind of have to be open with people and talk in that way. Because if you don't allow them to be honest with you and say, I don't agree with it, I find it awkward, I've just felt too busy and all those sort of things, they can't be honest about that. They're going to feel that way anyway, so you might as well hear it. So that's how it works, and then you agree a kind of constant set of actions. But you can be quite demanding of people in that process. You can say, well, great, brilliant, go for it. Now let's see if that works. Really commit to it. Really do that. Go for it, and you encourage them, and you can kind of create a kind of motivational drive there. Anyway, hopefully that captures some of that.
No, it does. It does. You know what I kept thinking of in that is that maybe some of the leaders listening will think there isn't room there to correct where people are going wrong because you're co-constructing, it sounds softer than what people are used to. A lot of people are used to going in and just laying down the law as they see it. You've done this wrong, you've done this wrong, and you should fix this immediately, yada yada. In this co-construction process, it might sound as if there isn't space for difficult conversations within that, but I think there is. And I think if people can come to that self-realization and want to improve, or they might come to the realization that they don't want to improve. They want to move on as well. There is a lot that can come out of that process.
So I think that's true. I mean, and also I think this is one thing one of the reasons for the co-construction is that, and this is like an evidenced thing from studies of teachers, is that it's just like any child teacher feedback relationship, adults are the same. So I might see a teacher teaching a certain way and in sort of similar to someone else and think, oh, well, I'll give them similar feedback. But actually, no, that teacher is going to respond better if I just sort of really quite direct with them and say, Michael, that with those think pair shares, I've noticed that you just say, okay, guys, have a chat on your tables. And it really doesn't work. Because have a chat on your tables to those kids you're teaching just means it doesn't mean enough to them. They don't quite know what to do. And I've seen it several times now. So I think we really need to work on the structure. Like you've got to give them a question with a structure, which is come up with 3 ideas, think of your own, and share them and ask them what they agreed. And it has to be structured, because otherwise they're just recycling ignorance. They're not talking. They're not helping. You're not helping them enough. I could say to a teacher, I really think you need to do that because it's not working. Another teacher, if I said that to them, they just say, get out of my room. Who are you walking in here and telling me that? And you have to know that teacher. Another teacher, I'd be saying, yeah, I love what you're doing. I mean, it's brilliant. You're like, it's such an energy and you're so charismatic and the children really love it. Do you think that discussion format is working? What do you think? I mean, have you ever noticed some of the things they say? And I might just be totally sort of round the houses about it because the teacher isn't ready for me to just tell them I really think, they're not ready for that. And you have to sort of be intelligent about that. I mean, different people react differently to that kind of directive. So if you can support a teacher to say, yeah, maybe that's a bit sloppy, isn't it? Maybe perhaps I should ask them to be, maybe I'll try that think, pair, share thing that you keep banging on about, like, I go, well, why don't you give it a go? Give it a go. I know it's like, you get some nice responses from some of the students, but I really reckon if you tried that, you might find it works really well. So how about that? And I'm much more sort of tentative. Another teacher, I'm 100% saying, I really need you to do this because it's just not working. And you know what I mean? I think that's the joy of the work, because teachers are human and you have to work with the people you've got,
Yeah, you're right. And it comes down to relationships. Like if you know the people you're working with, you'll know how to work that co-construction feedback meeting. Yeah, this is brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom.
Well, thank you very much. I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it all day. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're most welcome. I want to ask you one last question though.
Go for it.
As someone who's really, really immersed in the education space, what are you excited about? What are you excited about in education right now?
Oh, wow, that's a really good question. I'm excited about a kind of maturation, is that the right word, of the idea of a kind of knowledge-rich curriculum uh, and things like coaching, having a sort of second wave where they're a little bit more subtle and balanced with kind of more organic approaches. So we've been through this period of knowledge-rich curriculum being sort of like define everything, be precise about everything. And now I think people have got used to some of these routines. We can start being a bit more expansive in our view of that. And I work with schools where I feel like that's where they're at. And it's the same with, say, coaching. You need a structure, you need a system, you need it to work technically in a school, or else it just doesn't. But once you've got the system, I just think it's brilliant to get into exactly the conversation we've just been having about the way you interact with a teacher to support them to improve. But I've been to a lot of schools where they talk about that conversation being the ideal, but they haven't set up the opportunity for it to happen in the structures. So I feel like there's a lot of really good, intelligent work around coaching. I'm really excited that more and more schools are dropping all the sort of formal observations all the time. Like they're dropping them. It's the direction of travel is towards regular uh, cycles of developmental feedback and so on. And we're changing the culture in schools all the time, and that to me is very exciting. And fewer leaders feel they need to do the top-down judgment stuff. So I do think that's good, and I'm really excited about that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Where can people reach you, Tom?
Well, I'm always on Twitter, TeacherHead, at TeacherHead. My blog is teacherhead.com. And I'm also, increasingly I use LinkedIn just as myself, I think, on there. And obviously the walkthroughs. So walkthroughs is the whole website. We just literally this weekend released a book, the learning walkthroughs. That's just come out. So it just came out last Friday. It's written for parents and for children. So we're really pleased about that. So walkthroughs.co.uk, that you can access stuff there. So all these different things hopefully will interest different people.
Amazing. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been really great.